again, Eric Mason, Ravensmaw here to walk you through how to build a campaign from scratch. Today we're going to be talking primarily about the ideas behind your campaign, not what system you do it in or anything like that. We're just talking about how to build a story-based campaign. Obviously, I'm in many ways talking about homebrew campaigns. I'm not talking about when you're pulling off the shelf, because those are kind of written for you. But say someday you wanted to write a campaign that somebody else could play. This is going to be some really great tips and tricks for you to think through how to create a story that engages your players so that they feel completely invested in the world that you're building. And the first thing you want to do is what we did in a prior video, and that is think of your big idea. What is the thing that is the biggest part, the biggest idea that you want to get across? Now, in our campaign that we're building inside these other videos, we came up with a big idea of bringing the mighty low. So we're going to have these two big mountain gods. They've been warring over the centuries. But in the end, the mortals will bring these great gods down. The great powers, the bastions of power will be brought low by the lowly player characters and their allies. That's my big thing. That's your big idea. So now we need to tell that story in stages. I like to think of a campaign in acts, Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, but you don't have to think of it that way. I tend to think of it that way because I like to build in some big, powerful, explosive climaxes into the campaign so it really feels like the story is moving along. So the way that we do that is we work backwards. We work backwards from the ending. The mountain gods must be brought low, and therefore, I gotta figure out how to bring them low. Right? So in my story, I've got a big prophecy that was told long, long ago that eventually somebody would come and it would end that the gods themselves would lose their power. So in my story, the gods used to be not just friends, they were actually lovers. So it was a female god and a male god, and they were in love, but because of something that happened, they gained godly powers, and it brought them to an adversarial position so that they are now maybe jealous of one another, they hurt one another, but they have been separated for centuries, right? So I've got two groups. One is trying to keep the status quo. We want to keep these gods separate. We don't want them to get back together. We want them to stay separate. That is my adversary in my campaign. The player characters and their allies, on the other hand, they want to see the two gods reunite. So in my story, these adversaries do not want the gods to come back together, and the PCs and their allies want the gods to be reunited, but in doing so, they will cease to be gods, right? So that's how I'm working backward from my storyline. In addition to that, you're also going to want to play your adversaries. We'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute. You as a dungeon master, you have characters. They are your NPCs. Specifically, they are your adversary NPCs. You should be thinking about their wants, their needs, their desires, and you should play them as though they are as engaged in completing their goals as the player characters are. It's a different way of thinking about your game, but remember, you kind of have to play the bad guy if you're the dungeon master, and they should be seeking out their goals and quests, and the player characters might be getting in the way, but they're going to continue to think of ways to accomplish their goal. The next thing is you think through the quests. So now we're going to take our big story idea, and now we're going to break it up into the basic building block of a campaign. A basic building block of a campaign is an adventure. It is the player characters have a goal, they need something, they're having trouble getting it, and they go out to try to get it, and they either fail or succeed. Same thing for your adversaries. They have something that they want, they're got to do some things to get it, and the player characters either get in the way or they fail, and the adversary gets their stuff. So think through, start to break out how you would like this to happen in stages, and the way you do that is you make it personal for the player characters. What do I mean by that? Session 0. We're going to have another whole video about Session 0, but one of the most important things you do in Session 0 in a new campaign is you figure out how your player characters are directly tied to the adversary's goals, directly tied to the storyline of your campaign, at least in some way. At least maybe they were brothers of one of the main minions of the adversary. Maybe they They used to be part of the huge imperial empire that is trying to enslave worlds around the galaxy. And now they have realized that they were wrong and they're fighting against that empire. Right? Maybe they're a double agent in your spy campaign, but something should tie them directly into your world. And you need to figure out what that is, session 0. Next thing I do, once I've done that, so I've worked backwards, I've figured out who my adversaries are, what they want, what they would like to accomplish. Then I've thought through the campaign sort of in quests. And then one of the first things I do is I build a sandbox town. Now, some people run sandbox campaigns. I take a little bit different approach to that. I think of things in sandbox towns or sandbox locations. So within that location, go where you want, do what you want, talk to anybody you want, have your own goals, have your own desires, do your own thing. But in that town, it's all free reign. However, also in that town, every citizen, every place you go, is somehow directly tied into an adventure. Maybe loosely, maybe very directly, but everybody that you talk to has something that they want, and they're having trouble getting it. And your player characters might just be the solution. Or they are directly aligned against the player characters, and the player characters are now messing with their sandbox and causing problems for them, thus creating an adventure or a quest. So everybody you run into, from the mailman to the mayor, is going to have some kind of quest. I think of those 3 quests in different ways that they might get from their people in the town. They might get a quest, what I call a master villain quest. It is a quest that is directly tied to moving the story of my campaign along. Directly tied to it. It is integrated completely. There's another type of quest in there, and that is what I call a treasure quest. This is something that the player characters can do it. They cannot do it, but if they do it and they achieve it, they will gain something. An item, an ally, an important piece of information. It will improve their position and give them an advantage in achieving all the other quests. Could be a number of things, but those types of quests now exist in this world. Okay? And then there's the final kind, and that is a fun adventure. Something that is not directly tied to the campaign. If they don't do it, no big deal. It might be a haunted house and somebody needs them to rid it of ghosts. It might be a murder mystery that is just sort of, self-contained. Either way, it's something fun that the player characters will enjoy doing. If they decide to do it or not, it will not change the massive course of my big story campaign. Thinking through this stuff is challenging, okay? Breaking your game up, your campaign up into quests, thinking through all the different quests that might be involved in a sandbox town or a sandbox location, it can be hard. So get another brain. Watch videos, get another dungeon master or game master that you can talk to, even a player character, just to bounce ideas off of them, because sometimes everybody runs out of steam. So you've got the blacksmith. You can't quite figure out how the blacksmith is involved in your big story. You can't think of a murder mystery or whatever. Go talk to somebody. They can help you get some fun ideas to put in that sandbox town. Either way, your quests shouldn't just be in the town. They should launch the player characters into the rest of your world. So if you have your sandbox town, they meet somebody here, say the herbalist, and he needs herbs in order to make a potion because his daughter's been poisoned by the master villain who's got this big plot. Well, that should get them out of town and into the wilderness, allowing you to change scenery a little bit, which is always fun for player characters. It'll help them stay invested in your world. So your sandbox town becomes your starting location, but it's also a launching location that will send your players out into the world. You can do some wilderness adventures, you can do some random encounters, and they can really get to explore the rest of the map. And we're actually going to do an entire video on how to use a map to start brainstorming some of these ideas for your sandbox town. All right, so let's talk about working backwards. What do we mean by that? The first thing you should start with is your big idea. But the next thing you should start with is your adversaries. You're going to play your adversaries. So you need to think about what your villains' goals are. What do they want? What do they want to achieve? So in my campaign, as I mentioned, the one that we're building from scratch over these videos, I've got people who want to keep the order intact. They have gained power. Their entire base of power is based on the status quo. So anything that is going to threaten the status quo, they're going to fight against, right? You need to think through what they want. You need to think through what stages they want to achieve it in. That helps to organize your campaign into quests, into adventures. When you think a villain needs to get something or want something, that can be an entire adventure. That can be something that your player characters are involved in, and that can be a stage of your campaign. The next thing that you might want to do is build smaller climaxes into this using those stages. So think about it like this. I am the villain, and I have been trying over the last 50 years of my life to build a planet-destroying disease. So I must go to this planet over here and kidnap this scientist. I must bring the scientist back to my planet, and then I'm going to develop the initial parts of my poison, which will destroy these worlds. Now I need a delivery mechanism. I've got to go out here, and I'm going to get the delivery mechanism, which might be some kind of massive planet-sized sprayer. I don't know, like sprayer or something. Anyway, I gotta get that. Think through those, and each one of them should have a big climax. I try to think of it like, man, this needs to be a big battle with a minor villain, or this needs to, things should change when we hit the climax. This is like end of Act 1, the world should change. Player characters, families might die or be kidnapped. An entire town or planet might be destroyed. Think big, because when you think big, your player characters will get invested big. Don't just make it, oh, the people in the village are happy. No, none of that. The people in the village are now rising up in a slave revolt. Like something like that. Something big that really gets your player characters feeling like, okay, we just changed the world. I guess we really are important. That's what drives them to get invested in your campaign. Give your minor villains some goals too. Don't just make them two-dimensional. You have your big major baddie, but your individual minor villains, they also have goals, wants, and desires. And I usually try to make it personally related to the PCs so that they are, personally angry at this particular character, or they're this adventure over here actually messed with their family and now they're out for vengeance, right? So give them that personal motivation so that when they die in one of these major climaxes, it feels significant. Assuming that they die, assuming your player characters don't roll ones the whole time. Remember, whenever you're planning out your adventures, you have that other column over here, which is what happens if the player characters fail. What happens if the player characters succeed? You should think through both, okay? And what happens if the player characters don't even go on that adventure and decide, kick their feet up in the bar? Something should happen. Think through those ramifications. And remember that as you're thinking through this, again and again and again, I'm going to say it over and over and over again, the basic building block of a campaign is the adventure. The adventure might take one night, Friday night, Saturday night, might take 2 nights, might take 3 nights, but it is the basic building block of your campaign. So, they should be fun. They should be engaging. You should think what is going to happen on that night, and it should be fun for you. It should be fun for them. Everybody in your game has a really important job to play in a role-playing game, and that is to be engaged and to have a great time. If it's not fun, and if it's just the dungeon master, the GM telling their own story, the player characters aren't invested, and it wasn't a hoot, you failed. I mean, everybody failed, right? Player characters to the DM, but the number one job is to have a great time. That's what the gaming is all about. So let's talk about a 3-act campaign. Stage or Act 1. Very simple. Sandbox town, that's what I introduced. The next thing I do is I think through my minor villains. I may or may not introduce my adversary villain, but they should have connections to my primary adversary. So I'm going to introduce some minor villains in my stage or Act 1 of my campaign. I'm going to have some pretty major quest treasures that they're going to get. So those treasure campaigns, that gives them an advantage as they move forward. I want them to be engaged with those. Go and get a special ring, find a scroll that tells the great prophecy, something like that. And then I'm going to introduce my big baddies, my major villains. So they're going to hear about them. They might see them. They might interact with them. Curse of Strahd style, where, he likes to meddle with the peons. Could be something like that. But you want to introduce them so that they get the feeling that this big, huge confrontation is coming. Now, Act 2. What do I do? This should definitely involve a main villain, your major adversary interaction. Something should happen. It may not be a direct confrontation, may not be a fight, but there should be a conversation, go to their house. It should start to feel like this is where the train is headed at some point in the campaign, and make it personal for your PCs, part of their backstory, part of the actions of Act 1 that have directly engaged this adversary to be aligned against the player characters. They should gain some allies. I love to bring in NPC allies. Could be one person, could be a whole group, could be a whole town. But try to give them the feeling like they're not alone in this, that they have something to fight for, someone to fight beside. It really helps with engagement. Then, again, one or two major treasure quests, another place they can go and get new information, gain a new ally. Those should be involved in your campaign. And you may be doing all this from your original sandbox town, or you may have a new sandbox town now in Stage 2 or Act 2. New locations. They should feel like they've gone and seen different things in Act 2. If they explored one region, try to move them to another region or another huge town or another planet or something like that, because that really starts to engage them. They have new people, new adversaries, new monsters, new strange plants, whatever. It starts to really get them excited because they're exploring this new side of your campaign in Act 2. One of the things that I try to end Act 2 with is a major quest that requires significant sacrifice from the player characters. What do I mean by significant sacrifice? They're going to lose something that they care about. Could be an ally. It could be a leg. It could be a major magic item. It might be that they can never return home again. But it should feel as though they have lost something. And world changing can be an important part of it. Again, towns destroyed. A duke overthrown, causing civil war. Major issues that require the player characters to make a sacrifice. It's not no sacrifice versus sacrifice either. It's which sacrifice are you going to make. That's important. Makes the story feel like it's got high stakes. Finally, the world should be permanently changed. I mentioned that in Act 1, but it should be significant and permanently changed by that sacrifice. Nothing will be the same again, ever. Finally, the last act, of course. What's going to happen in the last act? They're going to have to deal with the effects of the sacrifice that they had to make. The Sophie's choice that they were forced in. Which child you want to die? The effects of that sacrifice come home. If they are forced to anger an ally, they now have to deal with the angry ally that is now their enemy, their adversary, something like that, right? Then minor villains should be faced here. We should really feel like the minor villains are going to come in head-to-head contact with them, and it's time to wipe them out, either win or lose. We need to get rid of these guys. We need to take them off the map because we need to get all the way to the big adversary in this part of the campaign. Major new location, always fun in Act 3. Big cave to explore, huge dungeon, the dragon's treasure hoard, something like that. Major new location that maybe has been talked about in other adventures, but now we've gone there. Then we're going to correct the world. So that major sacrifice that they made, maybe it caused problems. Maybe the master villain has caused some serious issues. We need to do some things in this part of the campaign that fix that stuff and correct the world back to the way it belongs. The elixir is returned and the adventures and the journey of the hero, right? Okay, that is enough. That is plenty for this video. But the idea behind it is simple. That your campaign, whether it's homebrew or one that you're working on from a module, should feel like your player characters are actors in a story and their decisions have consequences. They should also feel like the adversaries they are facing are equally as motivated to accomplish their goals. And if you start with that main idea and you think it through in stages and you make sure your villains have real goals that are important to them, minor villains that have real feelings about where things should go, I think you'll find that your player characters, your players, will want to show up Friday night to see how they can affect the story as it progresses. They'll want to know the next chapter because they're a part of it. All right, well, that's enough for this week. I hope you guys have a terrific weekend with whatever game that you happen to be playing this weekend. If you're not gaming, I hope you're thinking about what the next game is going to be like, because the best thing that we can be doing right now is having a great time with people that you care about, and I hope you're doing that right now.